All right, everybody, we are back again for season 2 of the Coach's Compass. Again, don't remember what episode it is because we just been continue to bring on cool guests from all across the world. It's your boy, Coach Coop, reporting live from the US of A. My boy, Coach Jay, again, can't be with us tonight. Time difference, all the different things going on. But remember, hit that like, subscribe, comment button down below. And remember, turn on your alerts so you can be reminded when we drop an episode each and every week. But we got another cool guest with us here today. We got Coach Danny Strom out of Georgia Southern. He is the sports and performance coach at Georgia Southern, working with the men's basketball team. He is also the author of High Performance Hoops. Coach, welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course, man. So, how did you get to where you're at right now? What was the path leading to getting to Georgia Southern, and why working with hoops?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, kind of like any, young string coach, it started, kind of early on, high school, college. I was a college athlete, Division III baseball player, actually. It was actually my college string coach who saw my interest in this field. I was an athlete, wasn't the most talented, obviously, being at the Division III level, undersized. And, that sports performance was something, the weight room, strength and conditioning was something that I felt help my performance, something that would give me a little extra edge. And he saw that, we had a great relationship, and he kind of guided me to take a look at this field. He thought I'd be a good fit. And fortunate enough, I actually have a brother. He's a coach on the basketball side. So at the time, I was able to actually kind of get into the field, start an internship with him at Kansas State University with basketball. And obviously, with basketball being in the family, that's, kind of the route that fit best for me. It's always been my love. Unfortunately, being 5'7", 8", that wasn't an option. I'm playing in college, but that's kind of how I got started in the field. And from there, just had a ton of wonderful mentors, still close to this day. And just through those connections, led me to different places. It was actually one of my closest mentors, probably my closest friend in this field, Rob Hornett. He's the director of sports performance at Liberty. He's with the men's basketball program there. I was with him at St. Louis University. And he had some connections to Charlie Henry, who's our men's basketball coach here. Came from Alabama, so some mutual connections, got linked up, and everything kind of worked out, and very fortunate to be here.
It's always wonderful when you get good mentors that kind of put you in good places to
No
get to
doubt.
where you're at. But you talk about going from school to school. What was that like, having to make those transitions from different places, and then maybe not having, the coach that fully buys into what the sports performance side is? How is that to, kind of butt heads and kind of try to figure out the way?
I actually had this conversation with the coach the other day is, when you go to school, obviously each head coach you're working for is going to be a little bit different. And I think that the biggest thing where, from our sports performance side, where we really can get buy-in, I think it's going to come from the head coach first. So I think, get on board with what they're trying to accomplish, continue to relay the messages, the culture that, they're trying to instill in their program, do it from, the sports performance side as well. Obviously there's going to be things that we don't always agree on, but I think you got to pick and choose, what you view as most important, what are some things that are some non-negotiables, and what are some areas where, I may not 100% agree with it. At the end of the day, it's really not going to change too much on what we're trying to accomplish. And from there, just keep working together, keep having those hard conversations, be on the same page. And from there, I really think once you get the coach bought in, I think you can see that carry over to the athletes and everyone involved in the programs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, once the head coach is bought in, then he can kind of preach what you guys are trying to do, and then you guys can preach the same message, everything like that. But you also said you were a former baseball player at Division III level, and now you're at basketball level. What have you seen? Now, this is talking about athletes with all these games and travel ball, AAU, going from baseball to basketball now, right? Those are big things like a lot of these youth athletes are getting involved in. How have you kind of had those conversations with parents and also with the athletes to kind of say that how has it hurt or helped their game coming into college with doing all that?
No doubt. I mean, I think with basketball, it's a little bit different. Hoopers generally just want to hoop.
Right.
Kind of
That's usually them.
Right, right. So, kind of in this area, leading up to, college ball, I'm typically, if you're recruiting high schoolers, they haven't spent too much time in the weight room. So for them, I think that's an area, especially when you get to this level. I mean, the physicality, the demand of the travel, the long season, you're starting practice sooner, you're here over the summer. I think that's a huge element of just getting their bodies physically ready for that. Just be able to withstand that demand. And that's a piece where you get them ingrained in the weight room, and you see those changes. You don't have to do a ton of whatever you want to call sports specificity or whatever. You just get them generally stronger. You get them to be great movers, and a lot of times that's keeping it simple, really right out of the gates can go a long way. And then once you build that foundation, then you can start implementing some positional differences and things like that throughout their 4-year development. So I think that's probably the biggest thing from a basketball standpoint. I think, baseball, in my experience, typically baseball players, like to lift like me. That's kind of how I got involved in this. But basketball players, that's one area that they're not exposed to earlier on in AAU and high school and stuff. So I think introducing that to them and, relaying the importance of it and how it's going to help them, not only from a performance side, but just keeping them healthy and staying on the court. If they're healthy on the court, they're at every practice, they're doing what they came here to do and what they love. At the end of the day, then I can say that, my program has, been a success and I'm trying to accomplish, what I sought out to accomplish.
Yeah. Do you believe like with all these, do you think it helps to specialize in one sport for like, if we're talking about the youth athletes, like saying like that middle school, high school level, do you think it helps them to specialize and say, once I'm in middle school, I'm just playing baseball instead of like doing being like a multi-sport
For sure.
athlete? Have you seen a difference with those athletes that were multiple sport athletes coming into college, or is there really that much of a difference?
That's it's an interesting question, and I think you get a lot of varying answers with it. Because I think now you're just seeing athletes kind of prioritize one sport. I still am a firm believer. I think growing up and in high school and whatnot, play as many sports as you can. I think building general athleticism, being exposed to different sports, various things. At the end of the day, I still think there's a piece of it that is hugely beneficial with athletic development. But, I think we're kind of getting to that point where, you individualize early on, and you just kind of got to roll with it. But I still am a firm believer. Play as many sports as you can. I just think, the experience is invaluable, and I ultimately think as you kind of grow and get a little bit older, I actually think it sets you up better for, the sport that you ultimately choose in college and, what you're going to play, as you kind of grow up. So
Yeah. No, I also agree with you on that because I think it kind of it weeds out with the parts that you don't really like about that sport. So when
no
you
doubt,
get to college, you can focus on it and be like, hey, like I really gave my all to all
no
these
doubt,
different sports, and then now I know like, hey, this is my main thing. Like this is
no
what I
doubt.
want to really be my career.
Hmm.
So I think it does help, and like you
For
said, it
sure,
makes them better general athletes, right? Because all those things you're doing a lot
for
of the
sure,
same movements for a lot of these different sports. But some of the sports you had to catch a ball over a shoulder. Some of
hmm
them you have to, like,
no doubt,
a lot of hand-eye coordination. So
exactly,
playing one sport can kind of hinder things, but hey,
for
what do
sure,
we know, right? We
for
haven't
sure.
seen the test yet.
And I think the another element of it is I think with a lot of athletes now, I think you're seeing some burnout start to occur. They just been doing
Really
the same
early.
thing really early, and I'm not so sure that's for the better. I think when you're at this stage, this should be something that you've looked forward to forever. And I think a lot of athletes, by the time they get to year 2, 3, 4, it gets repetitive, and you really start to see that burnout. And I'm not sure that's a good thing for young student athletes.
Yeah, because you never know if it's going to change for the better. Now, will they make like athletes able to go to professional earlier just
Right,
because they're seeing the burnouts and they want to keep the turnover still continuing
right,
to happen, right? To getting more athletes in. So you never know what it's going to
for
lead to,
sure.
but I guess we're in this field to see. Right?
And no kidding, no
Hopefully, we
kidding.
keep them
So
around.
strap in, and we'll see where it goes. Yeah,
For sure. So with this book, man, High Performance Hoops,
yeah.
what made you want to write a book and how was it to write your own book?
It was a long process, but even with the book, when I published it, was it's still incomplete to some degree, just because I think year in and year out, there's going to be things in your philosophy, your system, how you train that's gonna change over time. There's more information that's coming out. There's maybe more efficient ways that where works for, your teams or programs, and the athletes you deal with year in and year out are different and they need different things. Overall, I think it just provides a framework, and kind of condenses everything into a model just to help from a programming piece, making sure that we're hitting all the main things. We're keeping the main thing the main thing. We're hitting all the different elements that are, going to help that transfer training on the court. And then it's just going to help them essentially, like I touched upon earlier, and I'll touch upon it again here, is just staying healthy, right? Staying healthy. That's my biggest thing is, from a performance side, yeah, like we can make a difference in their performance. And I think that's a big piece of what we do. But at the end of the day, I want them to be out there playing their sport, what they're good at. From this piece, the weight room is a general aspect. I truly believe it's always going to be a general aspect that's going to ultimately complement the bigger picture of what they're trying to do.
What's been the feedback, right, getting from this book, like people that have bought it? Because obviously I saw this
for sure.
Coach Nate, who was a former basketball coach down at Weber, right?
Yeah.
And he's one that I saw it. I was like, okay,
no doubt,
gotta check this guy out, and see what he's doing. But also, it's kind of daunting and a little bit scary, right? To have now it's your words in writing.
Yeah,
right?
No doubt.
Like what you said on a podcast.
No doubt.
Like, oh, well, I was tired. Yeah. I missed it, but you published this, right? Your words
sure.
are out there now.
Yeah.
So what has it been like with that too?
It's good. And I stated this in the book is, what works for me and what we're doing here and some of the things that are in the book might not work for, you and your situation, but kind of the feedback is, it's been beneficial. It's taken a lot of information that I've accumulated through different coaches, through different resources, books, the literature, everything, and putting it into, just one system that I feel like encompasses everything we need from a performance standpoint. Obviously we have, world-renowned, speed coaches. We have, coaches who are really big on the strength side of things. We have, coaches really big on the plyometric side of things. And I think, taking bits and pieces from all those coaches, all those various sources of information, and kind of making sense of it all and putting it into a big picture and how it's going to help from a basketball side of things is really, kind of where I came up with the idea of the book and kind of how I formulated kind of my approach to training.
Can we expect a part 2 from the book?
I think we can expect a part 2, maybe more of a program based, where I kind of see what we do day in and day out from a programming side, off season, in season, postseason. I'm kind of get a little deeper dive into what an ultimate program would look like, as opposed to just kind of like the science behind everything.
For sure. And you talked a little bit earlier about some of the mentors that you have. Who are the people that you continue to learn from and kind of continue to sharpen yourself, and kind of people that you lean on to kind of set you back in line too?
For sure. I think the biggest resources right now, so I'm actually currently going through Fergus Conley's Game Changer, books, his 4 different books there, just because a big piece of what we're doing now is through high performance. So taking everything from sports psychology to strength and conditioning, athletic training, to the sport itself, and understanding the various stressors and how they play a role in the athletes' lives, how each part is affecting them in a positive or negative way, and trying to get all on the same page to align what we're doing, so we're putting the athlete in the most advantageous position, day in and day out, not only to optimize performance from a practice standpoint, but also a game. But really, I'd probably say the biggest resource or person that has influenced kind of my thinking is Tim Karen with his strength deficit book. I took his course as well. And when I read that book, it really changed my whole mindset of eccentric to concentric ratios and how that plays a difference between guards and bigs within basketball, just because those positions are vastly different, and the demand in practice and games is going to be vastly different from, a bioenergetic standpoint, from a jumping, sprinting, or distance, high, kind of IMAs or high intensity actions, things like that. That's kind of probably the biggest resource, biggest person that has influenced my line of thinking.
So this question right here is going to come from Coach Andrew out of University of Virginia, right? So the sports performance coach up there for the baseball team. His question was, what's one thing that 99% of the field believes it is true, but you think is false?
That's a really good question. Wow. Yeah, I think I don't know if this is necessarily like a true false thing, but this is something that I've come to believe wholeheartedly is, you know, as a sports performance coach and as a sports staff member, I think a lot of times we want to value our positions, right? Make sure that we have an impact on our athletes, which is we do to a piece. We're a piece of the puzzle, but I think a lot of times I think we try so hard to be such a valuable piece that we try to do more than we need to do with our athletes. So in season right now, with the time they're spending with me, the time they're spending from a recovery standpoint, are we doing it just to check a box and validating our position, or is it truly making them better? And something that I've implemented this year, probably to a little bit more substantially than a lot of coaches would probably agree on, is just the time they're spending with me and what we're doing from a training standpoint. Probably over the course of the 7 days of the week, they're only with me, probably say for a grand total of maybe an hour, maybe an hour and a half. To me, I think we're getting what we need to from a performance side. We're hitting all the areas we need to hit, but I'm not taking away anything from a court side. For me, there's travel, there's academics, there's film, there's everything associated with being a student athlete, even the social side that is taking up a lot of their energy and time. I'm not going to continue to add on to that just because I want to make myself feel valued. And at the end of the day, I think my value comes in being a stress manager, not a stress producer. So I think that's probably my hot take, if you will, at this point. And again, that could change here in a year or so, but currently that is something that I believe wholeheartedly in.
That's awesome that you're taking the account into what your athletes really want too. You know what I mean? Like, yes, they're to hoop, but they're people too.
No doubt.
No doubt. Like, they do have a social side that they want to live out, and also
no doubt.
Some of the time, this is some of these kids' first time being away from home,
right?
Being away from their parents, right? So they're still trying to figure out life, and then still trying to figure out, hey, is basketball for me for forever?
Yeah, so no doubt.
So many different things that you're dealing with that, like you said, you don't want to be a stressor. You want to be a stress release for a lot of their lives.
For sure.
What's one question you would want us to ask our next guest?
I think one of the probably the questions that made me think the most recently was, obviously this is an evolving field. It's evolved, in the past couple years or so, and I'm sure it's going to continue to evolve pretty dramatically, with the onset of technology and different information that comes. Is, where do you think this field is going to be in 5 years? What are some things you're doing now that in 5 years you're going to look back saying, I can't believe that I did that, or I can't believe I put that in my program, or, anything associated with the involvement of the profession is one of the biggest questions that I think it makes you think of, what am I doing currently? What am I going to do in the future? And where's my line of thinking going to change?
And what is it for you?
I think, to me, I think COVID threw a wrench in things a little bit, just because. No doubt. And I think I think eventually the field was on path to where, you were going to have a string coach associated with one team. So you're just going to have your one team or one or two teams, and you were going to be all in on that. You're going to do everything from, nutrition. You're going to do everything from a high performance, a wellness side, strength and conditioning. That's going to encompass everything, in terms of being a 24/7 student athlete. And I think with, layoffs and everything like that, I think we're working our way back there. But right now, I still think we're behind a little bit. And the fact that, I know a lot of schools and programs and coaches, you're having to deal with 3 to 4 teams. And I just think you're limited on what you can do. There's only so much time in the day. And then, at the end of the day, you still want to make sure you're the best version of yourself for your family at home, or it just limits what you could do. And I think, the more that we can limit the quantity of teams that we're given and the responsibilities, I think the more that we can do that will actually increase our value as a sports performance. So, coach, and then obviously just add a piece of, I think we have so much information at our hands right now. I think it's a little bit distorted on what to do with that information. So I think it'll get to a point where we're able to collect all of it and, take all the different pieces and bring it together and kind of get a better understanding of how they all interplay off one another, both technology, both, the physical side, the psychological side, which is a huge element that's gaining traction. So I think that's probably the biggest piece of performance that I think is going to change pretty drastically in the upcoming years.
And I'm super excited to see, how the old school and new school kind of come together instead
For
of
sure.
butting these heads on the technology side of
No,
things
sure.
and then stop being so data driven, but how does it still
Exactly.
help, because it's a
Right.
huge conflict right now, right? Because you still got the old school coaches that are just like, hey, I'm still gonna use my stopwatch, I'm still gonna my coach's eyes, my
Mm-hmm.
coach's eye, and then you got the guys that are very data driven, right? Using the GPS
Mm-hmm.
trackers, using the lasers, using
For
the
sure.
force plates, using the VBTs, right? All these things to help drive how they
For sure.
set up their programming. And now it's kind of like, now we're kind of almost in the crossroad to where
No
we're like,
doubt.
okay, how do we get this to flow together?
For sure. For sure. Yeah. And I think we've gotten to this point a little bit where we've kind of the new line of thinking. We've gotten away from training and we've kind of focused solely on testing and assessing. And at the end of the day, you still have to train, right? The old school thinking, like you still have to, in my opinion, you still have to get under a bar. You still have to do hard things with the addition of some of the other resources that are going to complement that. So,
That's
instead of
that's the
like you
awesome
said,
part about where we're at.
right, instead of butting heads, let's come together and collectively see if we can take all this information, take all this knowledge, and combine it, and take the best of both worlds. And I think you're gonna see a lot of positive results from
I think that all starts with coaches like yourself and not myself too, like sitting down and talking about it all,
it.
right?
No
How
doubt.
can we make this thing better? How can we continue to grow together and not use one against another and
Right.
butt heads? And I think that's why it's the perfect combination to kind of have sit downs and conversations like that. So, Coach, I appreciate you jumping on today.
For sure.
And I
No,
appreciate
for
you
sure.
sharing everything about the book, what you've gone through, and whatnot. And thank you so much for your time. I know time is valuable, especially in
Yeah,
the college
for sure.
sector. So thank you so much for your time today, and we appreciate it, man.
No, thank you. One thing I want to touch on here is, you talked about the piece of actually sitting down and communicating, and I think that's a lost art, especially with dealing with coaches and dealing with staff members. At the end of the day, I think I'm very fortunate to have a head coach who believes and buys into what we're doing. And he's one where he'll sit down the whole staff and we'll communicate face to face and get on the same page. Always agree, but at the end of the day, that having those hard conversations and having that communication element, not just hiding behind a phone, is a layer that I think we need to get back to. So, that's an additional piece. But no, I appreciate you having me on. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and excited to keep this communication line going forward.
Of course, man. Thank you so much.